What's up everyone, I'm Mike, and today in the shop I'm going to show you how to build this kitchen island. We have a handful of drawers here for your utensils, mixing bowls, and so on. And we also have built-in storage for our kitchen trash. Now for the countertop we went with white oak to set it apart from the other countertops in the kitchen. So let me show you how we built this. Starting out, I break down the plywood on the Craig ACS into more manageable sizes. Then I head over to the table saw to cut pieces down to their final size. At this point, I'm going ahead and cutting down everything that's made of plywood to its final size. So all of the notches are being cut, all the drawer parts are being cut to their final size, and for joinery, I'm using pocket holes. And this makes putting together the carcass for the kitchen island very fast and very strong. Here I'm temporarily holding the carcass together with clamps, and I'll be using 1 1/4 inch pocket hole screws to secure everything. Once the stretchers are secured on each end, I pre-drill and countersink 2 holes into each stretcher and secure it with standard drywall screws. Since the back of this kitchen island will be seen, I'm using 3/4 inch plywood, and again I'm using 1 1/4 inch pocket hole screws to secure it. For the face frame on this kitchen island, I'm using Poplar, which is pretty standard for cabinetry. Now, if you don't have the tools to mill rough lumber down to 3/4 inch stock, you can always buy this pre-milled and ready to go from your local big box store. Once all the stock is down to its final thickness of 3/4 of an inch, it's now time to rip it to its final width. Now with the miter saw, I cut all of the rails and stiles to their final length. And once again, I'm back at the pocket hole game, getting these rails and stiles ready for assembly. I really like using parallel clamps to hold things together while I'm assembling stuff with pocket hole screws, but every now and then you need a face clamp to reinforce that joint to make sure things don't move. To make sure the center stile will be in the right spot, I use the remaining 2 rails as spacers. And to make sure that those last 2 rails are in the correct spot, I just simply measure, double check, triple check, and then screw it together. With the face frame done, I'm ready to add it to the cabinet. Now before I do that, I need to add this little spacer to the base. To install the face frame, I use glue and 18 gauge brad nails. Just line everything up flush with the sides, and then nail it in place. To make sure that my trim that goes around the edges of the cabinet will be flat, I run a flush trim bit around the edges of the face frame to make sure everything's flush with the sides of the cabinet. With the MDF cut to size for the trim on the kitchen island, I head over to the miter saw and make my first miter to start working around the base. Then I systematically work my way around the base, gluing and nailing the pieces in place as I go. With the base trim installed, I set up on the table saw to cut my edge trim to 45 degrees. With all of my pieces cut perfectly, of course, I go ahead and install them with glue and brad nails again. Okay, so maybe everything wasn't perfect, but while I had the putty out to fill the nail holes in the trim, I went ahead and touched up some of those miters that maybe had just a little bit of a gap. Alright, with the base of the kitchen island complete, we're ready to start milling stock for our 5-piece drawer fronts. Once again, we're going with Poplar, and once they're resawn on the table saw, I head over to the planer and take them down to their final thickness. Now we're ready to cut all the stock down to its final width on the table saw, and then once that's done, we head over to the miter saw and cut everything to its final length. Now you may notice that I have some scrap wood on the back of my miter saw fence, and that is to reduce chip out or tear out on the back side of the pieces. And here's where the fun really begins. Over at the router table, I break out my tongue and groove router bit set. I like to start off by cutting the groove in these pieces first. I don't know, it just seems the easiest to me because you put the groove in all of the rails and styles. And then I switch over to the tongue bit and I cut the tongue in the ends of all of the styles. What's also nice is that with the tongue bit still in the router table, after I cut all my center panels, all I have to do is adjust that tongue cutter a little bit to make a rabbet in my center panels that'll fit into the grooves. Now to assemble these 5-piece drawer fronts, I put a little bit of glue on the end of 2 styles. With those in place, I put glue on the other end of those 2 styles, and then I slide in the center panel. Now, just put the top rail on and clamp it in place. Oh, yeah, and double check that everything's square before you leave it. Now back over at the table saw, I cut the drawer bottoms out of 1/4-inch plywood. Then I cut the groove to accept those bottoms and the sides, backs, and fronts of all the drawer box components. And you guessed it, pocket holes again. This makes drawer assembly just so fast it's not even fair, so of course I'm going to use pocket holes to assemble the drawers. With the glue on the false drawer fronts all set up and cured, I run them through the drum sander to make sure everything is nice and smooth. Alright, so do you want to know the secret to painting MDF without it looking terrible? Shellac. Yep. I spray 2 coats of shellac on all the MDF surfaces that are going to get painted. And once that's good and dry, I apply 1 to 2 coats of primer as needed before I actually start my top coat. Alright guys, we're coming to the home stretch on this project because now we're milling stock for the countertop. We went with white oak here, and as you can see it's rough sawn, so running through the standard milling operations of cutting to the rough length and then taking the tour through all of my favorite shop toys. Now the finished size of this countertop is too wide for my planer, so as you see I'm gluing it up into 2 separate panels that are about 17 inches wide each. With the glue cured, I bring everything down to the final thickness through the planer. With these boards just shy of their final thickness, I head over to the drum sander, run it through a few times, and then get started with our final glue up. To trim this countertop down to its final size, the easiest method that I have in the shop is to use the guide saw by Craig. We ultimately wanted the countertop for this kitchen island to be 1.5 or so inches thick, but the stock that I worked with yielded only 1 inch thick when it was all said and done. So I grabbed some extra material, planed it down to a 1/2 inch thick, and then scabbed it on as you see here. And with the glue cured, I used the guide saw to trim things back up. And as you can see, my lovely full-time assistant is knocking out sanding duty while I assemble our drawer boxes. Alright, so favorite feature of the kitchen island here is our trash can drawer, which is only something an adult would be excited about. Now for our coveted trash can drawer, I actually went with a 3/4 inch base, just so that's a little bit more substantial. And for the rest of the drawers, I assemble 2 sides to one drawer front or back, slide in the bottom, put in the last front or back, and then screw it into place. With the countertop sanded up to 220 grit, we use Varathane's briar smoke to stain it. Alright, now this next process is kind of hard to see, so I'll explain it as best as possible. Basically, here I'm installing some spacers for our drawer glides, and what I'm doing is I'm using a piece of plywood to set the height from the base of the cabinet, setting that spacer on those pieces of scrap plywood and screwing them into place. With all these spacers in place, I now just install the drawer slides per the manufacturer's instructions. And to get the drawer boxes in, basically you just use enough spacers to line them up in the inside of the face frame, and then screw the drawer slides to the drawer box. And here I'm using Craig's cabinet hardware jig to drill holes for our drawer pulls, and this is a super easy jig to use, so if you can read instructions, you're set. To secure the false drawer fronts, I run drywall screws with a washer from inside of the drawer box into the false drawer front, and I use spacers as needed to get everything lined up. Now to attach the drawer pulls, I just drill through those pre-drilled holes in the drawer front through the drawer box, and then I use the included hardware with the pulls to attach them. With the countertop centered onto the kitchen island, I run 2-inch pocket hole screws through the stretchers into the underside of the countertop. And by the way, we painted the kitchen island with General Finishes milk paint and sealed it with high performance top coat. Alright, well that's going to wrap us up for the day. I hope you enjoyed the project as much as I did, and hey, thanks for watching. Now if you want to build one of these kitchen islands for yourself, be sure to check out the free plans that are linked below. And a special thank you goes to Craig Tool for sponsoring the project. Ah, you're still there. Awesome. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, I got another one queued up for you right here. And if you want other awesome content from me, check out those. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like and subscribe. And until next time, have fun making something.